Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional, human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumile Mateza. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by calling us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. In Matthew 22, verse 20 to 22, the King James Version, the Bible says, "And he saith unto them, Who is this image and superscription? They said unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. When they heard him say these words, they marveled, and left him and went their way." Christians the world over are at variance as to the meaning of this statement by Jesus. However, stemming from the investigation into the commercialization of religion, the South African Revenue Services has issued a directive to engage religious institutions with the intention to investigate tax non-compliance in the sector. Today on Rights and Recourse, we explore whether churches understand what is meant by compliance and whether they should be compelled to pay tax. To discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by Ms. Mkhwanazi Xaluva, Chairperson of the CRL Commission, Pastor Giet Khosa, Executive Officer of the Rema Ministries South Africa, and lastly from our Pretoria studio, we are joined by Mark Kingon of the South African Revenue Services Group Executive Relationship Management. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Thank you, Matez.
Good afternoon. Pastor Khosa, let us start with you. Probably we should try and get an answer to the question, what did Jesus mean when he said, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's?
Well, I think if you read that scripture, you will see that it was a tricky question. People tried to find Jesus what to do and what to do. And so Jesus gave an answer that, what is right, you do. What is wrong, you don't do. What is belong to Caesar, you do. What doesn't belong to Caesar, you do. What belongs to God, you give to God. So they were looking for answers to suit them there.
In essence, they were saying they, as Jews, should not be expected to pay tax to the Romans.
Correct.
And when Jesus chose neither side,
yes,
they just walked away.
That's what you do.
How important is it that the church should contribute towards the fiscus of the GDP of the country? They do contribute to the GDP, but of the country in terms of tax paying.
Yeah. I think this subject obviously is bring sharp focus to the activities of the churches, what we do and what we do with the money that we receive. But remember, churches by its nature exist for the benefit of their members and the community in large. So by virtue of what we do, we contribute because we look after the well-being of our communities and our society.
But that's not what the report of the CRL was saying. Ms. Xaluva, Mkhwanazi, the question here is, what motivated the Commission to make the recommendation made that SARS should investigate whether churches should pay tax?
As we are going around, one of the things we're asking for was the financial statements from the churches. Part of it were bank statements for us to check and see how much money we're looking at. And part of what we're asking is, how compliant is your church? You see, there's the normal thing that happens in churches, tithing, and giving. That's the normal thing that happens in a church. But what we discovered was that this is an industry. It's a business.
It's $1 billion industry.
Every year. So what we're saying is, if you're selling all these faith products, because that's where issues are. It's not in terms of the tithing and the normal thing, giving when it's time to give in church, but it's when the church becomes a business and it's still operating as a non-profit organization, One of the things we're asking was, if you're selling faith water and you're telling us you're buying it for 4 rands and you're selling it for 30 rands, that's a huge profit margin. And what are we saying about this selling? That's why we said, SARS, we know something is just not the normal thing here. So we're not talking about people who are doing normal things like, in normal churches, but we're saying this is a serious business. And like everybody else, people need to pay tax. It's not like, you should walk away from the tax man.
Mark, I don't know whether Mark can hear us or whether Mark is there, because I don't see him on the screen. Are religious organizations aware that they may apply to be exempted from payment of income tax and certain other taxes in terms of Section 10, subsection 1 of the Income Tax Act of 1962? Are the churches aware of that?
I would say they are aware, and obviously there's greater educational focus that we can do, but there are a number of entities that are just choosing to ignore their obligations. So I do believe, since the law was changed in 2001, that the churches are aware, the religious institutions as such, as to their obligations. And I think we need to acknowledge here that a vast majority of religious institutions are actually doing the right thing and paying the rightful tax on their commercial undertakings, and very importantly in terms of pay as you earn. But there are a segment, and very importantly, that are claiming to be there for benevolent activities where they are seeking to enrich themselves, and we are more concerned that those monies which are being taken for people's pockets are not being taxed, and that is our concern.
The other thing, Mark, in accordance with the directive that I read by SARS, religious institutions are prohibited from directly or indirectly distributing funds to any person other than in performing their religious activity. What in essence does this assertion mean? What is religious activity in terms of SARS? I'll get Pastor Costa to tell us from his point of view.
Well, obviously each religious institution differs, and that's important to remember. But it's to conduct the activities of that religious body. So it could be paying the pastor a wage that is commensurate with the services that he's rendering. It could be running soup kitchens. It could be doing other mission work within the organization, etc. But when it starts getting diverted to people's pockets, that there's no accounting for that, that is the concern.
Pastor Kosa?
Before I even answer that, I want to, if you allow me to go to...
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go back to the issue of awareness. In one of the comments that I was asked during the course of the week is the issue of, are people aware? I think there's an obligation to SARS, as Mark has said, there's an obligation to SARS to start campaigns and making people aware. As he pointed out, there are people who are really complying, and there are people who don't know. You see, so some people don't know what they need to do. So I think there's a responsibility from SARS side to ensure that they've made people aware. There's education in that. So I think for me, I need to zero in there and emphasize that, because the majority of the people want to do what is right. More so if you're a pastor or run a religious organization or a church, you want to do what is right. But if you don't know what is right, so that issue of making people aware, their obligation. Of course, I like what he said, that majority of the churches do comply. So it's not just everybody who's doing the wrong thing. So coming to your question, I think for us, as we understand the law, is that a church has a lot of activities, and the money that comes in a church goes to the activities of the church. And he mentioned things like soup kitchen. We do a lot of outreaches, prison ministries, all those things. That's what we do. And some churches, like our churches, has a staff that look after the congregation. They do get paid, because that's how the church survive. You have buildings that need maintenance and things like that. So, but then when you start doing other things, as Mark says, that now is diverted from, it look like now if somebody's enriching themselves from a donation or offerings or tithe of the church, that's where things goes wrong.
I think let's come to Mam Kaluva. Mam Kaluva, you in your report, you says very clearly that there are various issues that are going wrong with giving in church. Like people have to pay for water, people have to pay for books, they buy water, they buy all sorts of things. Buy to see the pastor. If you want to see an audience with the pastor, you must pay the pastor. And those are the kind of things that you identified as the wrong things.
Those are the kinds of things we identified. And you see, for us to say the majority of people are compliant, how many churches are in this country? Nobody knows. So the first issue is how many before you can say the majority. Some people say there are over 100,000, 200,000. So when you look at how many are compliant, the fact that you're not registered, it means already you're not compliant and you intend being non-compliant. So for those that are registered and known, we'll say maybe there is compliance 50%, 40-something percent. But the majority, and we dare say it's the majority, are out there in the wilderness. And that's why we're saying these things need to run parallel. And forcing registration and monitoring the system and assuring that the taxes are paid, etc., etc., it's very important. Because people are hiding behind freedom of religion, are hiding behind all sorts of other things by not doing the right thing. So we're saying, of course, some are compliant, and I dare say, you know, there are churches like Rhema Church, etc., who gave us their books, and we investigated their books, and we found everything to be in order.
What about those who refuse to give their books to you? What's happening to those who refuse to give their books?
We're in court. Because we believe, you see, the issue of non-compliance and the issue of people who decide to ignore the law. And if you are a person of God, man or woman of God, you're leading people and you're actually teaching them that we can break the law and get away with it. So for us, it's a matter of the courts must deal with them the normal way.
Mark, SARS actually believe that there should be, in order for this determination to be made, this can only be made on the basis of a comprehensive evaluation of income and expenses. And I think you are going to be doing that as SARS.
Yes, that is correct. And I think it's important we just reiterate what religious entities are supposed to do. Firstly, they are supposed to register with the South African Revenue Service. Now, whether they are registered as and qualify for tax exemption is one thing, but even if they don't qualify for tax exemption, they still need to be registered with us. So, for instance, we are aware as an organization that some churches are operating as normal profit-making companies, and so the requirements of a philanthropy and a benevolent activity does not necessarily apply to them. We are concerned about that. But what does apply to everybody is that remuneration paid to people is pay as you earn is deducted from that. So all religious institutions do have to submit tax returns to us annually, and for pay as you earn monthly, obviously. And very importantly, we can audit those, and they provide financial data to us in respect of every single church that is complying. What is of concern to us, we looked at the data again in this past few weeks, we've been analyzing some data, is that a number of people have registered, but they just fail to submit annual returns, and they just ignore us in that regard. So we are going to take firmer action in that regard and start prosecuting, because tax non-compliance can lead to a criminal offence, and we need to start ensuring that religious bodies adhere to the law. And I think they should be examples in our community of adherence to the law, and that is what we are appealing for.
Pastor Khosa, the tax authorities seems to be concerned that salaries of some of the pastors, clergy and employees of the church are not regulated, therefore obligations such as pay as you earn, remuneration, as you heard Mark say, and other taxes are not being paid in terms of legislation.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the whole debate, you know. I'll just give example with ours. So every income that a person earns as part of our organization or our church, get tax on it, and everything gets sent to SARS, and annually we submit what we need to submit. So I think those churches which are not doing that, they need to know that it's illegal not to pay tax in terms of your individual income. But also I want to come into the issue that was raised, is that, you see, we got a church, the church stand alone as a PBO, and then we also have, like, for instance, we've got a bookshop. The bookshop is registered separately to the church.
I've been to that bookshop.
Yeah, so it's run completely as its own entity. It doesn't interfere with the church. So if anything needs to be sold, like books, like tapes, they go in there. And that's how it works.
I would imagine the same with the television station.
Yes, it's registered completely separate to the church. So everything is run separately, and the church is run as a PBO. That's what it's supposed to be. So the donations and offerings that come in there, it goes to the activities of the church. And you'll find other churches like ours, who does that. And some people know the law, they just don't do it,
In America, they seem to argue that though tax exemptions for churches, the terms exemption for churches, they haven't changed it, but they still have exemption for churches but some believe that the fact that churches are not paying tax, are exempted from paying tax, it actually undermines Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between the church and the state. In other words, what I'm trying to say, if the church is going to play its pastoral role of keeping government to account, holding government to account for the things government is supposed to do for its community as the church, then the church should oblige and pay tax so that it says we have nothing that the government is going to ask of us, and government is not going to tell us to stay out of government affairs.
You see, for us it's very clear. The issue is, if you are a non-profit organization, I'm sure SARS can talk to that. There's a limit. You see, then you register as a PPO, and there's a limit. And if you are making R1 million a month and you're selling stuff, is there a VAT issue involved there? Are you paying VAT? Are you registered for VAT? Or you just selling stuff and not paying VAT? So it's more complicated than just the income tax. Hence we said SARS needs to look at this thing. There's a lot of buying and selling. And if you're buying and selling, what we know is that then you must do what people who buy and sell do, because they're a shop. So are you charging VAT on this thing, or are you just giving people water? And why would you be involved in a business and then you come back and say, oh, I didn't know, Shane? If people are opening a spaza shop, they know what to do. We are now entering a business and you're making good money, and we're not talking about people who are making 300,000 rands or whatever. You're talking millions per annum, serious millions. And everyone is saying, no, let us be. But our issue is, we must all be law-abiding citizens at the end of the day.
If you'd like to join our discussion today, you can all call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts on this program and many others to Recourse at sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
When life takes a different turn.
If I didn't eat the speak, he was going to evict me.
Your will to persevere is ignited.
I'm not a professional speaker, but I'll try my best to give you a word of inspiration.
He was just trying to provide for his family.
If you can't accept it, change it. If you cannot change it, accept it.
And a new story begins.
Made a resolve to myself. I'm learning something new.
Bophelong, every Friday at 5:30. Be part of the life-changing journey.
Welcome back as we discuss whether churches should pay taxes. We have a caller on the line. Good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening to me?
I'm listening to you.
Right, sir. Look here. I look at these churches that we got on in Durban. There's always a pastor and his wife, a big picture of both of them, husband and wife. You'll find it on the poster there, his pastor and his wife, and they got another pastor and his wife right throughout. Well, I would say I'm speaking from the Chatsworth area. Now, I want to know. I worked out the thing is these people are running businesses. These are not churches. These are big businesses, and the sooner the tax man gets hold of them, the better it is. That's all I can say. Goodbye to you.
Thank you very much, George. John from Durban in Chatsworth. Let's go back to Mark. Mark, in the process of research of the program, I came across a guide compiled by PricewaterhouseCoopers for recreational clubs, such as golf clubs and old colonial-style sports club like the Wanderers in Johannesburg. And the assertion is made that SARS took a dim view of recreational clubs and belies that and that they exploited their tax exemption status. Is SARS taking the same view of the religious institutions?
I think just very importantly, clubs have got a different tax exemption framework in the law than the religious institutions. But yes, we are taking a dim view in terms of the trading. And I think it's important that we reiterate the trading issue. The law actually exempts all related activities. So donations and tithing is exempt from tax, that's very clear. Where it starts getting grey is when I sell religious books. Is that related trading or not? And we're needing a bit of definitive answers in terms of that. But it is my view that when I start selling, for instance, water, which cost, per the example earlier of 4 Rand for 30 Rand, no matter what I call it, that is trading. And that should be taxable. Very importantly, churches are allowed to trade up to 200,000. There's a de minimis rule of 200,000 and a percentage of turnover that they can trade without any tax. But if they're earning above that threshold, they should be paying tax on such transactions. And I think we need to ensure that people are aware of that, and they need to start fulfilling their obligation to our society and pay the rightful portion.
The other thing, Mark, that I read in the directive you came up with is, according to SARS, it has been found that religious organizations are issuing tax-deductible receipts in terms of Section 18A of the Income Tax Act of 1962 for donations towards religious activity, and this is not permitted by the income tax. Do you want to explain that for us?
Okay. In the framework of legislation, the Parliament actually passed law that allowed for donations to be tax deductible when it is used for certain purposes. So let me give you an example of where, if I utilize it and I'm running an orphanage, that's permitted. A school, educational activities, it's permitted. But the law specifically excluded, and I'll give you 3 examples, cultural institutions, religious institutions, as well as sporting institutions, that donations to those activities, when it's that type of thing, is not tax deductible. We have found that Section 18A, as we call it, of the Income Tax Act, receipts have been issued. And very importantly, what SARS has been doing, and we've issued a number of assessments in the recent past, is we've been raising assessments on the religious institutions where they've incorrectly done this, and we deem such donations as being taxable, and a number of religious institutions have faced quite large assessments in that regard. And we'll continue to evaluate that in terms of the legislation.
Quickly, let's get these out of the way. Aparo, you also say in the directive that the religious institutions are encouraged to use the South African Revenue Services voluntary disclosure program to regulate their taxes. Are religious institutions aware of this provision?
Well, I'm aware that one religious institution has already applied. Whether they, as a rule, know about it, I think that's part of the communication plan that we're going to be introducing. Just very importantly, it's to allow a person to come forward within a framework of law that allows them to know that they can come clean without the threat, maybe, of prosecution and penalties.
Are you aware of that, Pastor?
Yes, from our side, we are aware as a church. But I think there's a lot of work to be done from SARS side in terms of communication, because I do know I interact with a lot of pastors across the country. I know most of them don't even know what's going on. In fact, they get, scared to hear that SARS will be doing this. A lot of communication from SARS is actually crucial, so that everybody know what is their obligation.
You see, one of the problems that was faced by the commission, the CRL commission, in its investigation, is these pastors who run these churches that are proliferated across Africa and in South Africa, they flaunt this wealth. They buy aeroplanes. I read the other day that one pastor bought a Maserati for a 2-year-old daughter, and to me this is totally outrageous.
Look, it's sad that the space we're in, as you've described it, it's embarrassing that some pastors would behave that way. And I think SARS, when people see flaunting these things, that's where they need to start, because we should behave in a manner that represent what we do. We should, people in a community, in a society, look up to church for solution. And unfortunately, when people behave like that, it's very sad. So we really totally against that type of behavior. And SARS must start there. When people flaunting their wealth, they must start and check if you're doing your obligation.
Mamkaluva, I would want you to talk to us about this and tell us what you found in your investigation. But after this call from Yusuf from Benoni. Yusuf, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Yusuf. Switch off your TV,
Okay.
Yusuf.
Hello?
Yes, Yusuf, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The comment I'd like to make, I think SARS should also investigate the people that are donating to church organizations or any other religious organizations. Where did they earn the money from? How? Because I give you an example now. These people who were caught swindling the VAT, for 90 million rands. Now they take certain amount of money and they give it to any church organization or religious organizations. They need to also be investigated, because this type of proceeds coming from illegal means are not acceptable.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Yusuf actually reminds me of something else that I picked up. Mamkaluva, you'll tell me if you've heard that when you explained to us. One of them was people who are involved in illicit money, selling drugs and all sorts of things, take this money, because it's a lot of money, they take it to the church. The church then has to take this money to a bank, and they are waiting on the other side and waiting for the money to come back, because they don't know what to do with the money. That is happening with many of the churches, I'm told.
One of the things we discovered was that some of the wealth or whatever doesn't make sense. If you've got a church in an informal settlement, and suddenly we are a multi-millionaire. The logic says...
I think we are in the wrong business.
Yes. The logic says, something is happening here. We're not sure what it is. It's not our business to look into that. We have said the relevant state institutions should look into those things, because you then do not understand. Some of the churches said to us they're sending money back to their original churches.
Or they're repatriating the money back to another country.
of the money. And we said it's an issue for SARS and the Reserve Bank. It's not our business. Our business is to make this thing to work better for religious communities. But one of the challenges that SARS will be faced with is that there's no database of churches. You see, if I want to start a church tomorrow, I don't need to tell anybody anything. So if they're looking for these people, trying to find them and train them and run workshops for them, they're going to find a problem of where are they? Of course, they'll find Rhema Bible Church and all the obvious ones that are registered. But the other hundreds of thousands that are out there unregistered. And we've said the issue of registration of churches, the issue of registration of practitioners, because it's very important. You find that one church has 200, 300 practitioners who are working there. Who's monitoring that? What kind of life are they living? Even if they want to do a lifestyle audit, they can't, because these are unknown people. They're somewhere out there in the wilderness. So we're saying there's a lot happening here. Not only is it tax, not only is it all sorts of other things, but that the whole system needs to be shaken up and make it comply to normal norms and standards of the country.
Well, the whole system, the whole tree needs to be shaken up. If you'd like to join us today, today's discussion, you can call us on 011 714 5497 5498 or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
Welcome to Media Monitor, the show that analyzes the big news stories that made headlines. We bring you robust discussions on stories that made headlines in the week, where we interact with media analysts to unpack these top stories. Join me every Sunday morning from 9 to 10 Central African Time as I bring you riveting news and analysis.
Stay tuned to Media Monitor every Sunday from 9 a.m.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the issue of the fact that whether churches should pay tax. Pastor Kosa, you wanted to weigh in on some issue we actually termed money laundering, where money is being taken to church and the money is being taken to a bank and then it goes out the other way.
Yeah, actually that's money laundering. It's a criminal activity. And in fact, that's where SARS should look at those things. In terms of how money, there should be systems and accountability system in a church of counting money. A pastor should not get involved to start off with. So if the money is brought and then 2 days later, the pastor need to go withdraw that money and hand over to some people, that's totally unacceptable.
Shouldn't the onus, though, be on the church to say, where do you get this money? Why do you want to bring this money to the church?
I think it's a yes and no. You can't go around asking people where they get their money. I mean, you just can't do that. However,
you're happy with the money coming in.
But however, if a person bring the money to the church and said, Pastor, in 2 days, I need you to go withdraw that money because I need it for this. No, that's why you say, no. What are you talking about? You didn't give me the money. You gave the money to the church. So the money does not go to the pastor. It goes to the church. So the question the pastor should be asking that person is, why are you asking me the money? You gave it to the church, not to me. Once the pastor says, okay, let's get involved, already there in that whole thing, it's a criminality, the criminal activity.
I'm actually surprised today we're receiving calls first from John and Yusuf and now from Abel, all names from the Bible. I don't know because we're talking about the church. Abel, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yes,
I want to understand something.
Go ahead, Abel.
I want to understand something. Those people, are they only looking at churches or to a traditional healers? It's like the one-sided. I once been a traditional healer.
Well, yes, I think the issue of the traditional healers will deal with it at some other time, but presently we're only dealing with issues around the church.
Yeah, it's around the church. It's around the church, that's good. But why are they always attacking the churches? They had never heard since from last year talking about the traditional healers.
Abel, nobody's attacking the church in the program. What we are trying to find is what a directive that came from the South African Revenue Service, that they are going to be looking at these issues of the church going forward in terms of paying tax. And if we are a church that is looking at our congregations, how their congregation is served by the government, therefore we must help government by paying our taxes.
But okay, how will you audit the money which goes into the church without it? Because there are no receipts there to show that somebody has paid such an amount and that one has paid such an amount.
I don't want to have a discussion between myself and yourself, because I've got people who can answer those questions here. Probably let's take that question to Mark in Pretoria. Mark, I don't know whether you heard Abel there asking how are you going to investigate this money? How are you going to know that this is the money that went into the church? Because I know the onus is on the church.
Can I go back just one step?
No, go ahead.
If I may go back one step to the issue of the entities where people can establish churches willy-nilly without any accountability. It goes down to the fact that I can establish an association of persons which is not regulated like a company or a trust. And there is no accountability for the actual registration of the entity. And that is something I do think we do need to address in our country that was highlighted earlier. How are we going to track the money? It is a challenge, and we need to acknowledge that when it is cash, it is extremely difficult to track. But the issue highlighted in terms of illicit flows, we're very much aware of that. And we are working with various other authorities who do have access to the information of money flows, and we will be engaging with them to see if we can determine. Our biggest concern is when monies are flowing out the country and ultimately are landing in people's pockets, and we are aware that people are buying luxury vehicles abroad, and in some cases even aircraft, etc., which are being utilized for personal benefit. Now that is clearly unacceptable, but it is a challenge to track that, and we're fully aware of that. But I do want to also reiterate, this is not an attack on religious institutions. It is simply there to make sure that people operate within the framework of law. And this is not an attack on freedom of religion or anything like that, and SARS is definitely at pains to indicate that as such.
Should we expect raids on some of these churches at some stage? Raids by law enforcement agencies?
Well, obviously we will use all facets of our law, which does include search and seizure, but obviously those are done in very rare cases. It is our intention to ensure compliance, and that is what we are committed to do.
Pastor Khosa, we did try and get the South African Council of Churches here in this discussion, because in my research I discovered that they are the only organization that made a submission to Parliament in 2002 through Advocate Alan Shwara of the Southern African Catholics Bishops Conference, where he argued that for the introduction of an automatic exemption from income tax, what is the status regarding the religious institutions and tax presently? You wanted an automatic exemption from income tax. Do you think that's fine?
Yeah, but can I, just before I answer that, I want to answer the issue of raids that you raise on churches. I think I need to go back, unless criminality has been proven, obviously through investigation, what people are doing. We will caution about these raids. If, like the example we gave about money laundering, then those areas must happen. But what
there was another report in the papers this week where people were saying they have been paid to pretend that they were disabled, and then they would walk away and they are free, and they've been paid about 3,000 rand, 300 rand. Those are the kind of things.
Exactly. Oh, those things get proven. Definitely, the law must take its course. However, we got to be caution this, one size fits all approach. And Mamgalu mentioned earlier on that people like our churches get attacked first, and yet we're trying to comply and do what is right. So we want to caution that even when that happened, one of the things that we did with the commission was this consultation that we did with the commission, which was very beneficial because we got to see how we found each other. So in terms of SARS, that would be our advice. Consultation always help, because we can help in terms of how you find these people, what do you do, how do you set up your workshop, and so on and so on. But raids, you go to the people that are always doing the right thing, and then because we know, then you put on the front page that you have been ready. So we really, unless criminality gets proven, then definitely law must take its own course. Yeah, in terms of that, going back to your question, I think there's an obligation to pay in terms of income tax, in terms of pay as you earn. So when you earn an income, we have no bones about the fact that if you have an income, there's an obligation on you to pay tax like anybody else pay tax. But however, taxing the institution called church, that we really we don't think that's the way to go.
You should tell us, but let's take what we mean by taxing the institution called church. But let's take this call from Peter. We're John, Yusuf, now we've got Peter. Hello, Peter. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'd like to go straight comment.
Yes, Peter.
My straight comment is that the CRL is a good commission, and it is doing its job. And SARS did about 50.7 billion rand recovery. I think it will augur well for SARS to attach a full-time representative to the commission and sort of track these organizations, because these organizations are registered as NPOs and their finances are then under scrutiny, and it will augur well when SARS want to track these people. So my point is that SARS would benefit tremendously if they can track with the chairperson of the commission and get all these organizations under control.
Well, yes, that's Boki for the CRL there for a change. Mark Kaluva Mkonas.
Yes, you say for us, various state institutions must do what they need to do. We've made our recommendations, and the bulk of it, where we're supposed to start, where we stuck with Parliament on that one, is that every religious institution must be registered properly. And we're also taking it one step further. Every practitioner in those institutions must have their own register, because it's individuals who end up being rich, not the institution. The institution could be complying, and then the money is being channeled to pastors to buy fancy cars and fancy houses, and everybody is getting richer by the hour. So that's why I'm saying we need every state institution to be brave in dealing with this, and would like to commend SARS for taking this bold step when everybody else thought we were just screaming at the wind. This is about freedom of religion. Religion has nothing to do with you paying tax. You say that religion has nothing to do with illicit flows, and religion has nothing to do with you. You say that the challenge is what we found. There's one pot of money. As a pastor, I say, no, I don't earn anything. I earn nothing. Okay, when you buy bread, where does your money come from? Yeah, I take it from there. My school kids' fees come from there. So you say, where there's non-compliance, it's appallingly so. Because everybody should know you can't have one big pot and you're dipping into it and you're not paying tax and you come back and plead poverty. So it's not as if every man or woman of God is godly.
Mark, I don't know whether Peter referred to it there. I have a question here. In the last financial year, it was reported that SARS has had a shortfall of around 50 or so billion rands. Should this be seen as a way of trying to make up that shortfall?
Yeah, I don't think within the short term of this financial year that we've got left to the end of March that we'd be able to recover 50 billion. But I think the issue is very clear. SARS has to do all in its powers to ensure that everybody is paying their rightful portion. And hopefully, it is our intent to claw back as much as possible of that 50 billion as indicated.
Let's take this call from Sina from Boksburg. Sina, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon, sir, in the panel there, and Pastor Gibbs.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I like if they can do the similar thing like in Gabon.
What did they do in Gabon?
In Gabon, there's a control of churches in the right way. It's the independent churches. all of them, all the pastors in that area, they are registered to do the right thing, and there's a control over it. There is no one that just comes in and do whatever he likes. For instance, in 2012, we were there. Every person who entered the airport, you have to ask what they're going to do and how long are going to be in, and all accreditations must be submitted before you land in that country. It was well controlled and well organized. And everything that we received, it was counted before all of them. That's a good control of it.
Thank you, Sienna. That's one of the other things. I see a lot of African countries going that direction of imposing tax on churches. Zimbabwe started a couple of weeks ago or months ago. Nigeria's think of doing the same thing, because apparently, Pastor, churches don't even pay rates for the space they use to build their churches.
Well, it works differently in South Africa. We pay for rates.
We pay for rates.
Yeah, we pay for whatever services we use. We do pay. So
pay for the water.
ESCOM doesn't say, well, you're a church, then we're not gonna, So we pay for rates. And I think what needs to be seen here is that there is non-compliance, which we can't argue or debate it. It's out there. But we're saying, in approaching this non-compliance, people who are not must be found, and before people can be punished, they need to be helped, trained to say this is what you need to do. Out of that system, then if you don't comply, then you need to be prosecuted. That those who know,
prosecuted, you mean?
Yeah, if you don't do what is right. So, but that those who know are not doing the right thing, also don't need to be pursued. But that those who are in the name of religion, in the name of the church, committing crime, that's completely different, as we indicated earlier on. So that those different categories.
Mark 8, verse 36 says, "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" Is this what you see is happening with some of these churches?
Okay.
I had to ask you that question because you are the man of the cloth here.
Yeah. I think that scripture really, that means that, first and foremost, you need to receive Christ. First and foremost. You can't put riches before Christ. You can't put riches before your soul. That's what that scripture is referring to. As to what people are doing now, whether they're putting their soul before riches, I can't explain that. But really what that scripture means is that you can't accumulate all these riches and forget the fact that you have to take care of your soul, and that's receiving Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. I hope the gentleman from SABC is listening to.
That's something else. Are you saying he's not saved?
No, I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
You actually, he's trying to drive a wedge between you, because he knows the Bible, the people in the Bible don't like tax collectors, and now they want to drive that wedge. I want to remind you of that, Mark. I noticed,
yes,
Mark.
Well, just remember that a tax man did become a believer.
I noticed, Mark, that PBOs are registered with the Department of Social Development, and I would want to believe that you get a list, or you are interconnected in the way you work, because normally we found that, for instance, the fingerprinting of the police is not connected to Home Affairs, and Home Affairs needs to check who has an ID, who doesn't have an ID. Are you guys and the Social Development Department working together in terms of the PBOs?
We have worked together, and not as much as people may think, but just very importantly, within the tax law, there is no mandatory requirement that an entity be registered with the Director of Non-Profits. So there's a total separation as such in that regard. So the vast majority of churches are actually not registered with that directorate within social development. And there is no obligation unless they are providing certain services, etc. So if I've got an orphanage, I am obligated in order to get certain government funding from them.
Well, in your work, Madam Mkhwanazi-Xaluva, you strongly believe that churches and religious organizations, like other charities, should provide a social benefit to society. They should minister to the needy and poor in their communities, and they should provide an influence on society that they help to reduce crime and encourage good citizenship.
We believe that's the role of the church. We also believe that churches should not be seen as places you go to because you want to be healed or whatever. We believe as Christians you go there even if you just want to thank God for whatever you have. And I think it's that as a nation, and I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen, that we need to reorientate what we think a church is. What is a church? Why do we have a church? Is it a healing place? Is it a hospital? Is it a place you go to instead of going to the doctor? And I think it's there where we're going to start with the cleaning up of the system. And I don't think we should allow anyone to hide behind freedom of religion in terms of stopping the cleaning up of the system. Since the people who are getting abused most of the time are the very poor people. People's social grants go where they're not supposed to go to. People are asked to stop their chronic medication and take faith products and buy faith products. And those are the people who are most vulnerable. And those are people sometimes who are poor, unemployed, who are right at the bottom of the rung. And we're saying in order to protect those people, everyone in the system needs to do what needs to be done. We shouldn't be protecting anybody as we chase after the money. The police must chase after the money, the SARS and everybody. And once this thing becomes less lucrative than it is, those that are in to make money will go home and start something else.
Let's take this call from Reverend Liduga in Ladysmith. Reverend Liduga, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Afternoon, Daddy.
Yes, sir.
I say now, due to what we see now.
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Daddy. I say nowadays, as we see, in the name of religion, our people are being really robbed of their money, and the churches must really pay something, and they must be registered and thoroughly checked, so that at least people can now have the spirit of God, not the spirit of amassing money. Because we see there are those references which we don't know as well, they are ordained, coming from outside, now siphoning our people money here. Yeah, and now ours here, they say, if those who come are not outside, and then they are siphoning our people, why shouldn't we do? But now government must really see to that it does a fairly good job upon these churches. Thank you, Daddy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend Liduga. My apologies. I see you are from Harrismith and not from Ladysmith. The final word from you, Pastor.
Okay. Thank you so much. First of all, we want to say we welcome this initiative by SARS. And we also say no one is above the law. And we want to say most of the churches that we represent will want to comply with the law. However, with that, we want to also plead with SARS to say, please help those who are willing to do the right thing, but they don't know. Please have your campaign and your workshop. Bring them across, because we do believe that there are people who want to do what is right. But with the same token, we say if wherever there is criminality, the law must take its own course there. We don't support that whatsoever. And we think that we as churches want to be the example in our communities and in our society. Thank you.
Mark, a final word from you.
Very importantly, we welcome the opportunity to engage, and we want the religious sector to engage with us. Primarily, our role is to educate. We prefer voluntary compliance. So our first request is come speak to us. Let's have the discussions. Let's educate the people out there that they comply with the laws for the better of our country as a whole.
Mamkaluva, this has vindicated the Commission.
It has. Because what we've been saying, I mean, we've got so many enemies, it's scary to even walk down the street. But the reality of the matter is, we're not scratching where it wasn't itching. there's a huge problem in this sector. And I think as a nation, we've allowed it to grow into this huge industry. And of course, if you're trying to get money away from people, they're not going to be nice to you. But what we're urging the religious sector to do is to not abuse people and hide behind freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is not a shield for people to do whatever they want to do.
Well, Benjamin Franklin, in a letter to Baptiste Leroy in 1789, said, and I quote, "Our new constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world, nothing can bear to be certain except death and taxes." This famous quote is important not only because of the inevitability of taxes, but also due to the fact that taxes and the laws which frame them should maintain a level of certainty. In South African law, this is premised on among others, in Section 1C of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the rule of law. Thus, the rule of law purposes the law should not be formulated in wide general terms, but should be reasonably clear and precise, and otherwise, a decision by discretion is important. Findings on the rule of law are rationality test. This program is repeated at 5 on Monday morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you to our guests and goodbye.